Now, how did the molecules of life arise?
And we go a little something like this. Hit it.
Hello lovelies, today we're going to take a look at another book for Elfking, the Immortal. This is called The Curse of the Unpronounceable, and as an Englishman I have more sense than to try and pronounce anything in what is probably Scots or Irish Gaelic, because, I mean, they spell Siobhan C-O-Barn. So, yeah, I have more sense than to do that. But if you were to pronounce it phonetically as written, Sunraioch, I guess. Anyway, so, people who've been on the channel for a while will know that I find reviewing adventures quite challenging, because you can't really review an adventure without creating a whole bunch of spoilers for that adventure. So I can't really particularly go into the content of this, save on a very kind of loose and very shallow basis, because that would give it all away. So you are an elf lord, as you are in the Elfking game. You get contacted by another elf lord on the border with the troll kingdoms, wanting you to get shot of a cursed item that they happen to have on them, and which they're blaming for all their troubles with the trolls. So you toddle on over to their tower, take their cursed item, and then seek to destroy it. So it's a fetch quest in the tradition of Lord of the Rings and all of that sort of thing. You get a couple of companions, and away you go, facing dangers and perils of all kinds on your way. Now this is a single player game. It is laid out and split into sections. It's half to 2/3 the size of a standard fighting fantasy book, if you know, in terms of entries. And it's split into several sections, so you sort of complete a chapter of the story and then start on a new one. So it's more like, 3-ish separate little adventure booklets that are each sequential to each other. Excuse me, but at least that wasn't a cough. So what more can I say about it? So it's kind of 3/4 your typical choose your own adventure book, where you go through the different passages, right? And the remaining quarter is more like solo play, as we've come to understand it more recently. Because within the combat, at least, there is space for you to do things and try things and games master for yourself to an extent, but everything else is pretty much as you'd expect from a single player book. And that's about all I can really tell you about it. You're not going to find much in the way of new rules or anything here. There's a couple of little innovations around how it handles certain things, like consulting with your companions and so on. You have a certain number of consultation points, which you spend in order to consult them to get their input. And you get more consultation points for doing things that help out your companions and encourage them to be loyal and so on to you. Presentation-wise, this still, unfortunately, looks like it's just been dumped straight out of a Word document for the most part. I noted a few spelling errors, but most of them are things where you've got sound-alike words. So it's not the kind of thing that shows up on a typical search for issues. So I can forgive that to an extent. I do think, despite the way in which I often rail against over-ornate layouts and so on, that Elfking could really do with a bit more effort in its presentation. I mean, on the sort of chapter heads, you do get a slight page background, and it's pale enough and light enough that you can see the text through it, that wouldn't hurt. Using a different font that's a bit more ornate for the entry headings, things like that, might help. Be a bit more ambitious in terms of fonts and so on. The presentation needs work. The artwork is a mix of AI and other work, which again is very reminiscent of the 70s sort of paper tiger fantasy art books, which I loved and still love and still go back and look through from time to time. But while some of it's AI and some of it isn't, and some of it is commission work that has then been altered or processed or post-processed through AI, but there's no way to identify which is which. If you're against AI, that's your prerogative. But I've talked about that in specific reference to Elfking books before, so I don't particularly want to rehash. However, having tried to hire artists recently, the appeal of AI, particularly if you have a very particular style in mind, is much more appealing. But I recognise that's just because I've had a recent bad experience. I am curious how people feel about perhaps hiring an artist, and then if it's not quite exactly what you want, if you then use AI to post-process it, does that still give you the ick? If so, why? So I guess I throw that question open, because some of the art that I commissioned for my last project just isn't fit for purpose, but the pose and everything is still fine. So I'm curious, if I were to post-process it, how people would feel. This is an odd one. So you have, how many chapters is it? I think it's 3 chapters. Yeah, three parts and an epilogue. Each part is of varying length in terms of entries. So if I were to skip to the end, yeah, so there's roughly 80 entries to each part, I think. Yeah, roughly 80. Bit more in one place, bit less in the other. So overall, given the epilogues and the other sort of addenda in here, it's about 2/3 the size of a fighting fantasy book, all told, in terms of entries. Whether that's value for money for you or not, I don't particularly know. Style, and again, it's got a strong visual identity in the art, which would suggest a 4. But it's AI, that's either a make or break for a lot of you. For me, not particularly either way, so that would still be a 4. But the layout increasingly aggravates me when it comes to the Elfking books. So overall, I'm gonna drop that down to a 3, and that's as a fan of more simple, more readable layouts. It's just the layout is straight out of a Word document, and that's not good. In terms of substance, it's a choose your own adventure book, which means mostly you're only going to be able to play through it a couple of times. There's some monsters and things in here which you can transfer to your tabletop game if you're playing Elfking. So as a kind of monster manual, it's kind of slightly more interesting there. But at the heart of it, it's an adventure. I don't generally think adventures are great value for money, and solo adventures probably even less so, but I will be generous and give the substance score a 3, because it says what it is and you know what you're getting, so for that it's okay. So style 3, substance 3, bang on average, but you're gonna have to be someone who's into choose your own adventure books and probably into Elfking and actively playing something of it to get something out of it, or to get your value for money out of it. Of course, if you have Elfking, you would like to play Elfking, but nobody wants to play with you, then it has increased value there. In terms of tips, which I am trying to do more of, though some commenters have said it's arrogant and so on, use a more contextual and aware spell check. Something like Grammarly is worth its weight in gold for this sort of thing. That'll avoid those few little grammatical and spelling errors that I did run into, and I don't think they're a big deal, but you know, Grammarly's worth the investment, in my personal opinion. I am not sponsored by Grammarly in any way. Otherwise, yeah, layout and identifying what art is AI and what art isn't would also go a long way, or what art is AI modified, to give readers and potential purchasers a bit better of an idea. But moving to a more mixed approach, I think, is a step forward. There you go. Zang. There's a magical time on the cusp of true adolescence, where you're no longer quite a child and not yet an adult. A time where the confidence of the teenager and the wonder of the child combine in a surge of optimism, hope and imagination to make some of the most important moments of our lives. There's a rich vein of films that tap into this time. These are the films where the kids save the world, find something fantastical, or solve a problem that the adults can't or wouldn't even believe existed. Some of these are fantastical, some are not. Some are a loving homage to the older versions of the same sorts of stories. If you like The Goonies, Super 8, The Monster Squad, or Explorers, this is a game for you and your kids. Available at post-mort.com and drive-thru-RPG.
Ladies and gentlemen, a single bottle of Reverend Dr. Grimm's Miracle Elixir will solve your constipation, dissipation, exculpation, obstipation, extirpation, bastardization, demoralization, amortization, accusation, disorganization, boulderization, malversation, dehumanization, plagiarization, demonization, feminization, localization, categorization, stigmatization, monetization, pulverization, and rationalization, sterilization, victimization, infatuation, insinuation, vexation, masturbation, perturbation, litigation, subjugation, and the French pox, or your money back, as used by the crowned heads of Europe.